So my recent picture, victory, was for an art contest for Atom Hawk. I saw it, and I only had like a week to kind of accomplish it, and I needed to, I had so much stuff to do that I didn't have really like a ton of time to kind of work on it. And so I kind of didn't record the live process of it, but I'm going to walk you through the videos that I used for my entire process here. And essentially what it is it's actually really simple, and I'll show you my mistakes as well as some of the things that I did that I like doing, as well as what I didn't here. So the first thing is when I started, and I'm just going to kind of grab out my layer palette here, and you can see I've got a lot of layers, and I normally don't do this methodology, but I've been trying to really kind of force myself to get a better kind of work process going. And so I'm going to just take it back to the original piece here. So the original piece basically was a set of line work, and I just started sketching it, and I wanted to do, I didn't want to do like a big action scene or anything like that. I just wanted to keep it very, very simple, and with Memorial Day coming up and things like that, I kind of felt like it was more about the general concept. And so what I did was I started out with some real simple sketches, and I think I've got those. Open those up here, and I'll show you real quick. My desktop is a mess. Go to my Dropbox. Okay, so my simple sketches were, I had this idea, and it was essentially a really simple, really basic idea of, I wanted a veteran. He'd been wounded in war, a little bit sci-fi-ish, which is kind of out of my norm, and so I wanted something a little bit more different, a little bit kind of, not so actiony, not so everyday type thing. So I did some real quick sketches, and I kind of wanted that memorial costume. And so what I wound up having is actually, and this is kind of my workflow process. I started out with my baselines here, and just started building up. But I started out with this basics of, I wanted to have something very simple, him remembering his fallen buddies. And so what I did was I basically put in some reference, grabbed some photo reference, and kind of lined that up, and I just kind of really quickly roughed in the reference. And so I painted myself in there, and then as I started it, the process, essentially what I did was this was all one piece, and I really screwed up, and I keep doing it a lot. It's kind of a bad habit of mine. Is I started in one piece, and then I started building up, and the problem is, and I'm finding this more and more, the problem is that I'm really working with a lot more parts and things like that. So what's happening is I needed to go back and pretty much redo a lot of stuff. So I did this, and then all I did was I added in like kind of my main light, and I added in some shadows here, and I started kind of a real quick paint over. And the problem with that was as I started doing this stuff, I wound up getting just a lot of this information here, and it just got to be a lot. So what I did was I started breaking things down a little bit more. I was kind of unsure on his face and things like that. So essentially what I did was I added in his skin, and I got kind of age marks and things like that. And then I decided to age him like severely. So I added in like the heavy wrinkles. I added in a little bit of liver spots in there. and things like that. So I basically built up more liver spots, and then I added in hair and things like that. So the skin turned out to be like all one package, um, one folder here. And then as I started working at it more, I gave like some texture to the pants, um, and that's pretty much all it was just a texture brush, and I used for that. And then I separated the pants cuff and started building that up there. And then I worked on the jacket a little bit more and started working on the leather texture. And then what I did was I broke down the leather into smaller pieces. So I added one section for the trim, and the leather bands got their own section, and then a little bit more jacket texture, and then I added in buttons, so on and so forth. So, and I still haven't organized it. When you're working on it, you just tend to know where each thing is. So I need to go through and organize it. And then I added in the grass, and the grass was a just simple grass brush that I have. And if you look up, you can actually see how patterned it is. But I really wasn't worried about it too much, because of by the time I added on all the overlays, like right here you see all the patterning, but by the time I added on the like the foreground elements here, like this and all I did here was essentially the uh, draw the prism and then gradient out like kind of the angles. And then what I did was I went in with the eraser. I just did little selection sets, and I went in with the eraser and I added that in. So as I was doing that, those little pieces, then what I did was I added in like this rough sketch, and I started just copying and pasting the rough version of that in other locations. And then you can see, so I added all that in. And while I was doing all this, I went back here and I added in a level adjustment because I wanted it darker. I wanted it, kind of um, more somber, like a night scene. And then I added in the lights because I wanted to illuminate each one. And as you can see now, it's kind of awkward. And then I added in some shadows, which you can't really see too much of here, because they've been painted over so much. And with that, I finally added in some flags, and so my flags were kind of the last thing I added, but since I'm in this section, so I added these flags in, and I just did a couple here, and so you can see that these flags are just kind of all through this entire process. And the cane was just essentially a stick. I didn't need anything really fancy for that. I didn't want anything fancy. I figured fancy would take away from it. And so that was all my skin. Here. And I need to, like I said, I need to organize this file a little bit more. I kind of do the organization at the end, so if I ever do come back to it, I know what's what. And then essentially I did the appendages, and the appendages were really actually quite simple. Was two parts. All I did was select the parts and paint in there, and then just kind of each individual part. And then over it, I did the rough lines, and then kind of added in the hydraulic in there at the end. So that was the appendages. And finally, it was, as I go through here, I have a whole section on the patches, and the patches I think are what sold it a lot. So just adding in like a label on the arm, and then I added a patch over here, and I added a patch over here, and so on and so forth. So that's really all I did, was just added some stripes, and then finally this hat patch. And those patches were actually nothing really more than kind of implementing different. I actually went into another Photoshop document, and I went in my references actually. I'll show you that real quick here. Open. So I went into my Victory references here, costume Victory 2, And oh, maybe it's in here. Victory references. So I went in my victory references, and you can see some of the textures and stuff that I used. But a lot of this was, I just simply looked at patches here, and some real simple ideas, and even I painted the photograph there. Um, and you can see I painted the photograph here, and then just brought it in as a separate drawing, and kind of worked on it from there, because trying to do it at that angle with a bend in there, and I just warped it, and then I added highlights and shadows to it. I was working on the foreground elements for the grass just to get the grass in there, and then I wanted more shadow from here, so it's essentially one layer with shadow on it. And so I pretty much kind of worked with that. And then I added my highlights, which was my rim lighting here. And then here's where I actually struggled the most, and I got a lot of feedback from different people. But the first thing I did was I kind of saturated some of the colors a little bit. So if I go into my properties window here, I kind of added a little bit more blue tone and things like that. So I went from there, and then I added a vibrance, which kind of dulled down the colors. I really didn't want that highlight color in there. So from there, then I added a dodge layer, and that was just to give me kind of that instant reflection for the light. And I went in and I added some teardrops, and the teardrops are basically two separate things. One is the layer itself, and the layer itself is kind of a normal layer. And it's actually interesting because I took the fill out, which still keeps the effects on there. And so by doing that, I added in more, more tears and things like that. So you can kind of see that. And it's actually just a simple, if I take off the effects, there's actually nothing there. But by adding in just a bevel, inner glow, and outer glow, and then I wanted some highlights, so I added in some more water reflections from that. And so that is essentially pretty much it. I changed that. And I have two layers in here. So, oh, one more thing. I added in the kind of colors of the prism, and all of that is essentially just a color layer with some swatches of color over it. I'm going to get rid of my line work here, so that was long gone. And then one of the things that I was working with consistently was I did a value thing, and so it was kind of how it read. And I wanted his face to read. I wanted these etching stones to read, and I wanted to kind of just check and see what was reading. So I used a posterized layer in there, and then a black and white value, and those actually kind of really sold. Kept me back and forth. So those were things that I kept looking at back and forth and seeing how things read, and kind of working with it from that point in time. And then pretty much I just typed in my name, and from there it was pretty much done. I spent probably about 5 days, 6 days with this. If you look at my untitled here, this one here, I spent. Let me just put my layer back here. There we go. I spent about 6 days on it. Actually 7 days. I worked with the costume for the first day, and I kind of roughed out the idea here, and then just kind of started building up. And as you can see, my workflow process, getting the photography and getting the idea, drawing the lines and all that stuff, that's the majority of my work. This is, like I said, about a 4 or 5 day workflow. And then now my days are, you have to realize my days are short because I spend about 3 hours working on it. So maybe 15 hours total on this piece. And so as you can see, a lot of it in the end was, a lot of the little stuff in the end was essentially just all like refining little pieces. The majority of the work comes in the first 4 days, and you get the idea and you get the sense that it's working, and you just kind of keep pushing it until you start realizing what you like. Um, so that was a good portion of what I didn't care for and things like that. And so one of the big things that I need to keep working on is I need to develop a little bit more of um, my workflow needs to be a little bit more solid. I spent a lot of time going in, and after I did my initial paint, and that would be this guy here. After I did this initial paint, this was all one layer, and I actually wound up going in and then breaking it out. And so I spent a lot of work kind of just fighting that. And I think if I would have stopped and said, okay, hey, separate your layers, separate your items, I think that would have sped up my workflow. I think I could have probably got by with another day gone out of that. And so that would have been, something that I think I could have actually really kind of worked with and kind of um, pushed a lot better. So that was my first issue, I think, having it. And then, working with night scenes like this are really hard because there's not a lot of reference out there for it. So you tend to get this, everybody has this, either really, really dark or really overbright piece. So it's either like a nighttime scene at daylight or a nighttime scene that you can't see anything. So, it was really a struggle trying to figure out the lighting concept for this. And, so adding that stuff in there was kind of a frustration too. Um, but adding in the Victory Day flags and things like that were actually kind of interesting and kind of helped me out. Now, one of the things that I found, and it was actually interesting, after I got done, I just, I was so focused on getting this done because like I said, I had about less than a week to do this. So I really kind of pushed through this and really kind of created a good focal point for this, for all intensive purposes, to just try and really push myself. But after I got done, it was something that was really kind of interesting, which was the fact that I didn't see a lot of other artwork out there. The Atom Hawk contest, like I did a search on Twitter for their Atom Hawk victory, and I didn't see a lot. And I did a search for um, that on Facebook, and again after everything was done, I didn't see a lot of workflow. I only saw maybe like 20 or 30 pieces that was kind of accomplished. So I was kind of surprised that not a lot of people, submitted it, or at least promoted that they submitted it. So that was something that I didn't see a lot of. And the other thing is, I really kind of push textures. I tend to, try and keep the textures very simple, very, very easy, but I really wanted to push the textures, and blue jeans. Blue jean textures are something that, it's kind of one of those things that blue jeans are always going to be around. They're a timeless entity. And so having blue jean textures and having a little texture on the jacket and things like that, those all kind of really sell the piece. And you don't notice this, but this is pretty much 11 by 20, 21, 22. And so a lot of the detail I think is lost when I go into looking at the face and kind of how much um, information I put in there. And so that was another, something that I really didn't get. I mean, even like the hand here, I went through and added in veins and things like that. And because it's so large, when you look at it on screen, it doesn't show a lot of the detail that I did. But and again, I'm sorry I didn't have a actual paint over or painting process of this. Um, like I said, I was just by the time I realized I didn't painting, I was already like a third of the way through the painting, and I was like, eh. And I was more focused on, instead of content for the patron site, I was more focused on just getting it done, because the prize for it was a video card, which I really didn't care about, but it was also um, it's also a portfolio review, which I really really want. So I hope that this actually made it into at least the runner up, where a portfolio review would be awesome. Just to kind of help me focus on what I was doing, and kind of you know give me a better idea of what was going on. So if you had any questions, let me know. Hey, I wanted to thank everyone for subscribing to my Patreon, and if you haven't yet, check it out.